we'll also be sending it out, the recording out to everybody who is registered. So welcome, greetings. So happy everyone is here today for our conversation about U equals U. Real quickly to introduce myself, my name is Jenny Smith-Camejo. I am the Communications Director for Positive Women's Network USA, the premier organization of women living with HIV in the US. And just to give you real quickly before we introduce our panelists today, just to set the stage for you all, this is part of the PWNCares Sister Circle project, which is supported through generous funding from ViV Healthcare, the Positive Action for Women grant. And basically what PWNCares is a multimedia series that was developed by and for women living with HIV, covering topics that women living with HIV PWN members identified as really important, and things that they may not necessarily, be comfortable talking to a medical provider about, or may not be getting that information from a medical provider. So there are 8 videos in the series. The one that we're going to watch and discuss today is one of those. But there are several other ones, and I strongly encourage folks to check those out if you haven't already. I'm going to put a link in the chat box. It's just on our website, it's pwn-usa.org/PWNcares. And so we've got these videos. In the second cycle of this grant, the Sister Circle project, we're taking those materials we already produced and we're expanding on them. So we're having some of these live conversations like the one we're doing today. We also have started a virtual support group for cis and trans women living with HIV. And if that's something that you're interested in, you can also find that from that same page that I just put the link in. So pwnusa.org/PWNcares. And we're having, originally we were going to be having some, some of our members were going to be holding in-person events around these community events that we're doing online. Of course, with the pandemic, we are definitely not encouraging any in-person events, unfortunately, at this time. Maybe that will change next year. Let's see what happens. But for right now, everything is online. But yeah, thank you so much for being here with us today. And I'm going to give our panelists a chance to introduce themselves. And we'll just go in alphabetical order by last name. So starting with Deirdre.
Okay, so we have to learn this technology. Hello, hello, hello. This is Deirdre, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. And I am in Virginia, Petersburg, Virginia, and I'm just excited to be here.
Thank you. And then we've got Sherryl.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sherryl Lamm. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I live in Salem, Oregon. And I've been living with HIV for 25 years and still here.
And we're so happy you are. Thank you. Tiommi.
Thank you, Jenny. Hi, everybody. I'm Tiommi Luckett. I am the PWN Communication and Training Assistant, pronouns she, her, hers. I was diagnosed with HIV in September 2012, so I'm coming up on 8 years. And for those who don't know me, one thing, it's not really important that you know about me, but just like an icebreaker, I love pickles.
Noted. And Heather.
Hi, everyone. My name is Heather O'Connor. I live in Natural Bridge, Virginia. I am new to the world of activism, so very excited to be here and participating in this. I was diagnosed in June of 2016 with HIV, so I've been living with HIV before that, but that was the date that I was diagnosed. Very nice to meet you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you all.
I'm sorry, Jenny, I forgot to tell you all, I've been diagnosed with HIV for 19 years. December 5th is what I celebrate. So this year I'll be celebrating 20 years.
Wow. Congratulations. Awesome. Thank you all so much. So we're going to get started. The first thing that we're going to do is watch the video that I was just mentioning. Some of you may have seen it before. It's about 10 minutes. If you haven't, you're going to love it. If you have already seen it before, it's always worth seeing again because the folks in it are so amazing. So Let me pull it up, and I'm going to be sharing my screen and the audio. And again, panelists, if you have any problems seeing or hearing the video, please say something out loud, because once I go full screen, I'm not going to be able to see the chat box. Just FYI. Okay, let's go here. Box is checked. Okay.
Is undetectable.
Let's start from the beginning.
U equals U means undetectable equals untransmittable. When a person who is living with HIV is undetectable for 6 months or longer and adherent to their regimen, they cannot transmit the virus to their sexual partners.
Virus suppression means health. It's an epitome of health. It's the picture of health. It's the picture of strength. So I have been undetectable for going on 15 years.
The first thoughts that went through my mind when I received my HIV diagnosis was my son, who was 4 at the time. I thought about him not having his mom in his life the way I didn't have my mom in my life. My mother passed away from kidney failure when I was 12, and I thought I will only have 10 years to live. And I thought by the time he would be 12, I wouldn't be in his life. And I felt as if I let him down by allowing myself to contract this virus. And I was very upset with myself.
All that he could tell me was that the test came back positive. And it was basically, I wish you well. I don't know what to tell you. I'm not an HIV specialist. This is not my field, right? So for the next 3 months, all I could do was just cry because I didn't know where to go. I researched HIV, Arkansas, AIDS, Arkansas, HIV, Little Rock, as much as I could, and I came up clueless, empty. So the whole process from diagnosis to taking my first treatment, my first cocktail was 3 months. It was 3 months for me. I was really serious. I wanted to live.
To start it back in 1995, it was the beginning of October. My son was about 13 months old. I was working at Little Caesars Pizza, and I ended up going into the hospital. And the doctors, they were trying to figure out what was going on. They said, well, we can't figure out what's going on. Your diabetes seems to be doing okay, and your blood work looks good. But you have, tattoos, or you have a nose piercing. Do you mind us taking an HIV test? And I said, well, no, go ahead and do what you have to do. And so they did the test, and so it was probably back then in 95, it took about 2 to 3 days. And so it was like 20 doctors. They walked in my room, and I immediately dropped my head and I said, oh no, what could be wrong? And when they came in, they apologized. And I'm like, okay, what are you apologizing for? We're sorry, but your test came back positive for HIV. And that day, October the 17th, changed my life forever.
Once I went to the lab and took more tests, that's when things got really emotional, and I was no longer able to have a bold persona. I'm just watching her gather the things and, put the tourniquet on, about to insert the needle, and I asked her, aren't you gonna put any gloves? And she was like, no. And she told me that I'm not gonna get her sick, and she knows how to do her job. And I had an emotional rush of unconditional love and care that she was showing me at that moment, her knowing that this is something I have to deal with for the rest of my life. And she really, extended herself to just show me that I'm not someone to be afraid of. And it really impacted my life even to this day.
I don't think most women have this information. I think this information should be available everywhere. I think it should be available in the magazines, in the doctor's offices, in the train stations, in the bus stations, wherever it can post it up. It needs to be available on the billboards, on TV commercials, on computer screens.
I was never told by my doctors that if I was on medications, I would not be a risk of transmitting HIV. Now that I know that I cannot transmit HIV because I have a suppressed viral load and I'm undetectable, I do feel betrayed by my medical providers of not giving me that information.
And I would go to my doctors, and the doctors a lot of the times, but they are very ignorant to the fact that, okay, I'm undetectable. So it's almost zero that I can transmit this virus. And they're still saying, well, you still need to use protection, or you still need to do this, you still need to do this. And a lot of the doctors still don't understand. And they're like, okay, so what does that mean? Even in the hospitals, when I go to different doctors, they're always like, what does that mean? What is your viral load, or what is your CD4 count?
When I first heard U equals U, it was confirmation for something that I knew internally. Right? It wasn't something that I heard before. In fact, the first time that I heard about U equals U was last year in 2016. No one can tell me that I'm a danger to anyone. Like I feel so much better. I really do. It means that they are not a weapon. Sex is not a weapon. Sex is healthy. Sex can be healthy, sex can be enjoyable, sex can be pleasurable, even after an HIV diagnosis, right? In fact, have plenty of sex, as much sex as you can. It keeps me youthful.
U equals U give persons living with HIV a chance to live and to be free and to be happy and to have a life again. The first time I heard U equals U, I became hopeful. And it gave me the strength to persevere and to keep on keeping on no matter what. No matter what this doctor says, no matter what they do to me, no matter what people say, U equals U. And that means everything in the world to me, being a woman living with HIV. It means for my sex life that I could have more sex. I could have more sex without feeling guilty, with my partner, with my mate. And, I can feel free. It brings about freedom, and inner peace from the inside out. I can smile again, and I can be happy within myself. And at the same time, not having to worry about, am I going to transmit HIV to my mate?
I haven't let my diagnosis stand in the way of me achieving family and friends support, romantic relationships, a successful career, home ownership, and meaningful involvement in advocacy.
This status is not going to define you. You're going to run into stigma, fear, ignorance. You're going to feel shame. You may even want to isolate yourself. It's perfectly understandable. I did, a lot of us do. But just don't stay there. Don't stay there, and you don't have to go there alone. You will have people like me, people who are genuinely concerned about your health, your well-being, your mental health as well, who will be there with you every step of the way. we are definitely stronger together.
Undetectable equals untransmittable.
All right, thank you. I'm going to give a little hand to our amazing folks who were interviewed in the video. It's such a powerful video, and I've seen it 100 times, and I still enjoy it every single time. So yeah, thank you all so much. And one thing I should have said earlier, but it looks like we've had some new folks join us, so it's worth saying again anyway. We will be taking questions from participants. So if you have questions for anyone on the panel, whether it's for everyone or for a specific person, please put them in the Q&A box. The chat box is great. Please feel free to converse with each other. But for actual questions that you want us to bring to the panel, please go ahead and put them in the Q&A box so that we don't accidentally overlook them if the chat box is moving fast. So thank you all so much. Let me come over here. And also I've realized, so we have another panelist, Masonia Traylor, who was trying to get in and didn't have her link. So I am gonna be trying to get that link to her real quick. But while we do that, I did want to ask, Tiommi was in that video and we filmed it, I wanna say it was in 2017, I think. So I just wanted to see it, Tiommi, like watching it 3 years later, is there anything you want to add or any context you want to give to the time that you did that? Just wanted to kind of give you a chance to opine.
Okay, hey everybody. So one thing that it did was it took me back to that room, to that time. And I believe it was in 2017, and I'm trying to remember what conference we were at, but it's not important. But yeah, like just hearing Stacy and Sharon talk, it actually made me think about my own experience when I was first diagnosed, right? Even as my numbers were getting better, my viral load was getting lower and my CD4 count was getting higher with each test that was taken. No one in the doctor's office, no one in my provider ever mentioned U equals U. Right. And so I had first heard about it in 2015 or 16 with a blog that I wrote, and Bruce Richmond, the founder of Prevention Access Campaign, reached out to me through that blog because I was talking about how I wasn't a danger to myself. And so next year I met him at one of the conferences, and we just had this really engaging conversation. And he was like, they're saying this all over the world, everywhere except for here. And I'm like, well, wait, what can we do about that, right? So I joined the steering committee for U equals U, and I declared to share the message because that was one of the promises that I made to my higher power when I learned of my diagnosis, that if I can get through this and be okay, I would educate as many as I could about HIV. Right. And so educating them also meant that they needed to understand that HIV is not a death sentence. And so we are all walking, living testaments to that fact. Right. And so, but one thing that, even like with all of the good news about U equals U and us wanting to tell the world, one thing that I found really difficult is like having the conversation with my own family. It's like, they don't want to talk about it. They're okay just seeing that I'm okay. But at the same time, there was a point when I really didn't care what happened to me. And so I own my diagnosis, right? Because I was a willing participant in contracting HIV. And so I don't blame anybody. And, like upfront, yes, I'm upfront. I need to know that, nothing is going to turn you away later on after I've gotten my feelings involved into something. So I let people know up front who I am. I'm a woman of trans experience, and I was diagnosed with HIV in 2012. And the option is yours to deal with it or not. But yeah, took me back to that room and took me back to actually the purpose for us doing this, because I was so alone when I learned my diagnosis, and I went through the research and everything that I talked about in the video by myself. I didn't know who I could trust, and before I even like understood what stigma was, I was already like ashamed and didn't want to talk to anybody. So I didn't know who I could trust. I didn't know who I could open up to. And yeah, from September 2012 to January, I researched, got into treatment, and by April of 2013, my lab came back undetectable. And it was still 3 years after that before I even understood what that meant. And that was when I met Bruce. And so, yeah, I was like, shame on the providers, you know, for whatever reason, for not actually like taking my well-being into consideration. So I don't know what they thought they were going to prevent in like telling me about U equals U. I don't know if they thought I was going to stop taking my medicine or just go out and randomly have sex, but all of that was, it was not within their control, right? So they took away some control and some decisions for me to make for myself. I wouldn't have had to like live totally alone for 3 years after diagnosis, thinking that I was a danger to someone.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tiommi. And that sort of leads into the first question that I wanted to ask to all of the panelists, because Tiommi was explaining, right, that none of the providers she talked to ever told her about U equals U, you know, or even without the terminology, just that you know, that being adherent to treatment and having an undetectable viral load would mean that she couldn't transmit HIV to sexual partners. And we know that you know, scientists, doctors have known this for a really long time before the actual U equals U campaign was started. In fact, that's the whole reason that it was started, was to make sure that people living with HIV had access to this information because it wasn't being shared. So I just wanted to ask all of the panelists, you can just take turns, but when and how was the first time that you heard about U equals U, and how did it make you feel to learn that? Whoever wants to start.
Okay, I'll start. I learned about U equals U in 2018, which was several years after it came out, and even a year after the CDC adopted it. And I didn't learn this from my doctor or from anyone that I knew. I learned it through reading an article in a Pause magazine while I was sitting waiting for an intake into an HIV support group. And when I heard, or when I read it, I'm sitting there alone in a room waiting. And as I'm reading through this, and I still get emotional about it to this day, it lifted a huge weight off my shoulders, because I was being, even by my own family, it felt like I was being persecuted because of my disease. And I, you know, it made me realize that I am not a walking disease. I am not something to fear. I am a strong woman who has as many rights to live as anyone else. And the way it made me feel and what it did for me was just lifted a huge weight off my shoulders, because I was walking around feeling like I didn't have the right to live. And it really changed my life when I read it. And I have become very passionate and have decided that if I can help even one other person by letting them know this information, I'm going to go out there and do it. And it is a crime that our healthcare providers are not talking to us about this. It is an absolute crime, because it does lift a lot off of people's shoulders. It makes you feel emotionally better about yourself. What it does for you in your life cannot be described. At least I cannot describe it in words, because it felt very, very powerful to me. And I think that anyone and everyone, like they said in the video. It should be on billboards. This should be something that we're all talking about, that we have the right to know. And we're not going to go out there and I think the reason that they keep it to themselves is because they feel like we have risky behaviors. Well, you're going to have those whether you are given this information or whether you're not. So you're better off knowing what to do and how to do it and how to proceed in your life. That's how it made me feel.
Thanks so much.
Well, I found out about U equals U, but it didn't have a name then, 19 years ago, almost 20 years ago. The way that I was diagnosed was I was actually pregnant. And when I found out I was pregnant, of course, you know, they do an HIV test. I was actually in El Paso, Texas at the time. And my OBGYN, bless his little heart, I think I probably scared the love of everything that is good out of him. And he said to me, he's like, you know, Miss Johnson, I don't understand, you know, how this happened, but you're HIV positive. And right away, he made sure to get me into the clinic that would get me into all of the resources. And right then and there, it was like, listen, you can have a child without passing it on to your children, having transmission. You can do this, but it's going to be up to you. You're going to need to take your medication, and you need to take it on time. Eventually, I left El Paso and came to Virginia. And that's probably where I started to experience most of the stigma with the health professionals. And one nurse at a program in Northern Virginia pretty much said to me, and she gave me a packet, like Tiommi was just like I was a sponge. And I just kept reading and reading and reading. And long story short, I had to fight. Instead of having a vaginal birth, I decided to go with the C-section, because the percentage of passage was going to be less. The process was very hard because they're like, I don't understand why you want to do this. Everything is fine. But no, this is my child's life and it is important to me. I had to also educate the hospital because I understand that I may have been about the first of maybe 10 patients or mothers that had given birth at that particular hospital. So I even had to fight to have all of the tests and everything there. And then also to educate the anesthesia staff under anesthesia at that, because they yelled down the hall, you gotta be careful, she's got HIV. And so I had to then let them know, no, this is what you need to do. And I also had to educate the midwives as well as everybody else on that, just simple fact. So I've known about it for 20 years, but it wasn't until probably about 6 years ago that I even knew what U equals U was, and I boohoo cried. And eventually, like Tiommi ended up meeting Bruce and, you know, shared with them, you know, my story, and ended up meeting Evany Turk, and, you know, we'll talk about that a little bit later. But 20 years.
Wow. Yeah, how about you, Heather?
So for me, my journey with getting, you know, being diagnosed with HIV, sort of was a long process. I started having, you know, side effects. I was losing a ton of weight. I was very, very, very sick. I couldn't keep food down. And at the time, I didn't have a primary care physician. So I was going to urgent care. And I remember being so sick that, you know, I'm explaining my side effects. And then the doctor just said, you know, we're going to do a metabolic panel. We're going to check your levels. And just turned the light out and said, you know, just lay down. I mean, I was very sick. And so they did a metabolic panel. They came back and they said, you know, your sugar is really low. You have barely any white blood cells, but you have a virus. You need to rest. You need to eat more. You need to work less. And so I'm, you know, okay, I'm gonna go ahead and do that. And I think I took 3 or 4 trips back to urgent care until I finally decided to advocate for myself and get a primary care physician. During that time, I went to see the primary care physician, and she ran tests for, lupus, leukemia, autoimmune diseases. And she was, leaving the room, and she popped her head back in and said, hey, I was thinking, would you be all right if I did an HIV test? And, I was thinking to myself, I've been living with my boyfriend. I've been monogamous for 2 years. And I said, well, go ahead, just cover all the bases. And so she left, she went and did that. And I had started a new job. I was out of town with some new coworkers, trying my best to, socialize and make a good impression when I just felt awful at that time. And I actually received test results on my online that said I was HIV reactive. So I learned that I had HIV over the computer. And so I, of course, was upset. I tried to contact my doctor. I was at a Chipotle eating lunch with my coworkers, and I had gotten a call from my doctor. I answered the call and stepped outside. At this point, my doctor went to just, make an appointment with me. And I said, wait, hold on a second. I saw some test results that really concerned me online. It said that I was reactive for HIV. Can we talk about this? And she just goes, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. And my heart sunk in my stomach outside of Chipotle in front of the world. And I said, so are you is it true? Do I have HIV? And she said, yes, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry to tell you that. We have a new system. The test results were not supposed to be posted online. That was, I'm so sorry about that. And I just, at that point, I felt like I was floating above my body. I wasn't even there at that point. And so I had to call my boss at my brand new job and let her know, I just found out I have HIV. I was out of town in Charlottesville. I'd carpooled. So I had to have the secretary of the company drive me back to my home in Richmond so that my boyfriend could also get tested that day, and so that I could process everything going on. So that was rough. And then there was a waiting period until I got the actual Western blot test, where I learned how my viral load and my CD4 count and everything. And when I went in for that test, I went in with my mother. And having that conversation with that doctor it felt very impersonal. He told me I should feel lucky because my numbers weren't that bad. And I never heard anything about being undetectable. My first question to him was, am I going to die? Which I think speaks volumes to our, sexual education in the school systems, what we don't talk about. HIV, human immunodeficiency virus is, a vocabulary word that we write down, we write the definition, and there's the conversation that we have about sex and that we have about STIs, and it sort of ends there. So it was, I think it was within that next year, I ended up changing care providers because I didn't feel supported. I didn't know how to get my medication. I went to the pharmacist and they told me it was $7,000. And I'm like, well, I don't have $7,000. So here I am. All I know, I need to take this medication to prevent getting very, very sick, and I'm unable to access it. So I ended up changing care providers, and I did research online. And through my research, I was able to find out that U equals U. And finding that out changed everything for me. My boyfriend, who's now my husband, was also tested for HIV as soon as I got home from that work trip, and he did not contract HIV. But our relationship was, I was able to feel comfortable in myself, like, you know, I guess finding out who I was and rediscovering myself as a sexual being. Because after being diagnosed, I remember going to a doctor's appointment, picking out a sundress and saying, I can't wear this, it's too pretty. And I don't feel that way about other people, but that's how I felt. That's how I felt about HIV. I felt like I let that happen to myself, like it was my fault, like it was my choice. And you know, I mean, it was a really rough time, a lot of ups and downs, even dealing with that. And so understanding that U=U allowed me to start to discover myself as a sexual being and as, you know, a potential mother in the future. So, I mean, it changed everything. It really, really did. It changed my entire life.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm really glad that Masonia made it on. And so Masonia, the question was about the first time that you learned about U=U and what kind of effect that had on you.
Hi, everyone. So the first time I heard about U=U, it was from my provider. It wasn't necessarily put in that context of just, or being simplified as undetectable equals untransmittable. But for me, being pregnant and HIV positive at the same time, my doctor wanted to reassure me that I had all the tools needed to birth an HIV negative baby. And although I didn't understand or trust what was getting ready to happen, I did trust my provider. I trusted her love, her compassion, her hugs, her prayer, her, I guess you would say, cultural competency at the time. And even though I was a pharmacy technician and I knew that people living with HIV took medication, I did not understand how was my baby going to be born without HIV. So after learning about U=U, I was able to implement that messaging into my speaking to help save lives, to help deter people from applying stigma to my life, to my daughter's life, to be more confident about it, to just feel so empowered to share with young people that, hey, I may have HIV, but I'm not going to transmit it to anyone. The likeliness of anyone getting it is less than 1%. And that reassured people that, you know, not only can I take a stand of preventing or taking action to prevent myself from getting HIV, if I already have it, I now know that I can protect someone else's life. So my doctor's office, unlike, you know, a lot of other individual stories, that was how I learned about U=U. I was so fortunate to have such a loving provider within my care, my introduction to the HIV community and living my lived experience.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. That is really lucky. And to me, it's sad that that's lucky, because that should be everybody's experience. You know, whether you're pregnant or not, whatever the situation is, everyone deserves to have that information. And I saw in the comments too, someone was saying that they've had to educate their own healthcare providers about HIV in general and U=U specifically, and that is also sad. You know, there's no, to me, there's no excuse why in this day and age that should not, you know, that a medical provider should not know that information. And you know, that's part of what we're doing today, is trying to, and always is trying to make sure that that information gets to everybody, people living with HIV and also people who are not living with HIV. because I do see also some comments in the chat box and also in the Q&A about stigma and how, you know, this can be really important in fighting stigma. So I think I really appreciate all of you being here and sharing your experiences, because that's what we're doing together is beating that stigma. And so we have a number of questions in the Q&A box, as well as some that I wanted to ask you all. So for folks who are in the Q&A box, we'll be addressing most of your questions shortly. But I just want to stick with the same note. We're talking about providers, and then we'll probably go to some of these questions in the Q&A box. But there are new studies that show that people living with HIV have better health outcomes, including better adherence to treatment when their providers tell them about U=U. So I was just wondering, I mean, I'm guessing that probably doesn't surprise anyone here, but I'm wondering how we could get providers to, or more providers to tell their patients about this. And just wondering what your thoughts are on how do we get providers to share this information?
I kind of thought that we needed to educate the providers by giving them a seminar or something, some sort of platform where, like when they're having a conference, that we're included and we're able to go out there and talk to these people. The other way that I thought about doing it was fact sheets and putting them in every single office and letting them know, fact sheets for the providers themselves, and letting them know, hey, it's okay to let us know about this. I've had, you know, different ideas about how to get providers to inform them to inform us. And those were kind of my ideas that I was kind of floating out there. I was stopped by the pandemic, but that was the course that I was going on, and, you know, tried to get up materials to be able to train providers that from people who know it, people who live it. That's what I kind of thought.
Thank you, Sherryl.
Yeah, and go ahead.
Oh, thank you.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say I totally agree with the point that I think this seminar and like this education needs to be coming from people who are living with HIV, who, you know, are having these experiences with the care providers and having these conversations, because it's a right to know that U=U. That's a right, you know, and when you are diagnosed with HIV, that becomes, you know, it's part of your identity, it's part of your life, it's something that you're living with. And the fact that care providers, medical health providers do not know that U=U, and that's not part of the conversation is scary, because that's not allowing us to take steps forward. That's not allowing us to have access to our health, you know, to have access to options. And it's not the truth, you know, it's not the truth. And so then adherence to medication sort of it becomes something different, because if you don't understand that U=U, if you don't understand that adherence to medication is how you get there, and you're in a place where you've just been diagnosed with HIV, I mean, that in itself is so heavy. And that's something that's so difficult to navigate through. And so knowing that U=U, it gives you hope, in my opinion. That's just, but I think the most important thing is that this education should be coming from people living with HIV, because we're living it. It's our life, you know, and I think it's so important. Yeah.
Thank you. And I will add to that, in those seminars and trainings, you know, like we need to change the way that HIV is discussed. So we need to change the language, especially like by providers, because it's very clinical, it is very stigmatizing. Saying infected and stuff like that, you know, when I know that I can't transmit the virus, like that does something to you. Not only that, but like one thing that my provider kept saying to me in any conversation that was even remotely close to U equals U was that there was a 4% chance that I could transmit the virus, even being undetectable. So, and he never got it to no risk, right? And so that was in 2013. And it was 3 years later when I realized that I absolutely wasn't a risk. So the way that he framed the conversation placed stigma. I mean, I allowed that internalized stigma to dictate the next 3 years of my life, right? I thought that I was a danger to someone, and I didn't want to do that because in the grand scheme of things, I was responsible for my part in the sex, which is how I contracted HIV. But there was someone else who either didn't know his status or did not value what we had enough to disclose to me and allow me to make that choice for myself, right? And so I never want to be someone that takes that choice away from somebody else. So I just always remember what it was like being in on the bus coming home from work and getting a phone call from the doctor who suggested that I take an HIV test, and for him to tell me that I was positive and there was nothing that he could do because that wasn't his field. And so like when I actually got in to see a HIV specialist who was trained at the AIDS, through the AIDS education training centers, because that's a free service to providers, right? They don't have to pay for that, but it is up to them if they decide that they want to go through that training. And so that's why here in Arkansas, the choices are very limited as to who you're going to get your care from, especially when you're in a rural area. Like we have people traveling 2 and 3 hours just for their doctor's visits. And so, yeah, we got to change the way that doctors and providers actually talk about, and clinicians and researchers actually talk about HIV, right? Because they are doing more harm than help in the way that these words are phrased. So yeah, that's what I wanted to add.
Great. Do any other panelists have any thoughts about how we can get providers to share this information?
I think we should definitely tag team. Providers who show a lot of compassion, tag team providers who show longevity, but still joy and excitement in the work. Like they just still have that burning desire to be in it until the last one. And make those providers aware that, you know, what I'm hearing from Heather, what I'm hearing from Tiommi, that, you know what, like my provider, yes, you're doing a great job, but do you mind doing a training or maybe encouraging your colleagues to continue their education in this, because your peers don't know. Your peers aren't aware. Your peers are still telling my peers how to stigmatize each other, how we'll stigmatize each other within ourselves, and why knowing U equals U is important for us. You know, so when it comes to providers, I think that honestly, just like, you know, what was said earlier, we have to be the ones to speak up first, because I don't think that they know. They're so, you know, just closed in their environment that they do their job, they go home, that's it. You know, they don't realize the influx of, you know, how the community will respond overall. So I think that when it comes to our providers, making them just, if we know, then we make them aware consistently without, you know, without fail, without losing momentum behind that. I think it's so important that we do that part. And as you know, I love to speak about youth before they even become a medical provider. For those who are still in school, making them aware before they get there. Do you aspire to be a doctor one day? Well, here's U equals U, like just changing that mindset for the next generation to come, because the language is harder to change for those who are already here. But if we're doing this for those who are coming in up under us, unfortunately with an HIV diagnosis, then I think that we need to be mindful that the language can start where, you know, people are a little bit more malleable. They're a little more flexible and fluid in how we can approach their thinking. So the younger providers coming in, definitely.
And I'm glad you brought that up, Masonia. Hello and hi, and I'm hugging you from afar at the same time. That I've been, you know, knowing about this almost 20 years ago, one of the things that I started to do was just like you said, was to speak up. And so one of the things that I used to do here in the Richmond area was to go to different universities. I pretty much all of the ones here, and especially that are located in Richmond and the surrounding, I've gone to. And I am glad that there are those of us that like to speak up because of that. Then I know that there has been at least one person who had to write a paper, and we won't have a discussion on the name of this person, but this person had to write a paper for, they actually wrote it for their girlfriend. But long story short, they ended up interviewing me, and they are now one of the contributing columnists, I think I'm saying that correctly, for thebody.com. And I had the pleasure to meet this person, and they said to me, because of you coming and speaking out, I changed my path. I was not even supposed to write that paper, but because of that connection and we met, then I changed my whole thinking and changed to speaking on HIV, and has nothing, no family issues, anything past, nothing, but just because I wanted to educate. And then also having like the Sister Project years ago, the Sister Project stands for Sisters Informing Sisters on the topic of, well, at the time, AIDS. But that's, and what we would do is have these sessions with women of color in between the ages of 18 and 35, which with these small sessions, I've now had women to come back to me and say, because of some of my mantras, like if you don't, I won't discuss a few of them because they may be a few inappropriate, but at the end of the day, like I take care of me and I'm going to take care of me. And if you don't like it, because Tiommi kind of touched on it, like what you see is what you get. If you don't like my HIV, then hey, that's your problem, not mine. And those folks, there was one young lady who honestly tested positive during those sessions. And now 10 years later, you know, she has a child, she's married, and she's like, Mama D, like I still live by that. So it is important for those of us that are out there to speak up and to speak out, even if it's just to your teenagers down the street. And if you don't want to share your HIV status, that's cool. We get it, no problem. Even if you have to say, hey, I know a friend or I know someone, and it can start with you in your community, and then it can go from there. So it's important for all of us, you know, not just on this call because we've been doing it, but for everybody else that's out there. Let's speak up and speak out so we can eradicate stigma.
Thank you so much. And actually, Deirdre, I'm going to go into a few questions for our panelists, and then we'll start taking some of the questions that have come in from our participants. But Deirdre, I wanted to ask you, I know that, you know, stigma is really, like fighting stigma is really important to you, and Davina Connor, otherwise known as Positively D, you all drove like across the country talking about U equals U. Can you tell us a little bit about that road trip?
Best experience of my entire life, and I cannot wait until trip number 2. Best experience. Dee had this amazing thing laid on her heart, on her spirit, on her aura, on her universe, and she was like, hey, Deirdre, I got this idea. And she called me, and she's like, I don't know how people are going to accept it, but here's what I'm thinking. And you know, I'm y'all's biggest cheerleader. Girl, go get it. Go do it. Let's go for it. And she says, I want to go through those states. And it was especially when the report came out about the 13 states in the South. And she wanted to go out and really speak about U equals U. And her idea was to get this vehicle. Hopefully we wanted an RV. To be able to drive and put these stickers up with U equals U, different messages, different organizations and folks that support us, and speak about it. And we started in Denver. Then we went to Houston. We had an amazing time in Houston, and we met up with some amazing advocates there in Houston. We spoke at the Houston Department of Health for their CAB, as well as then from there, we left and went to Baton Rouge. from Baton Rouge to New Orleans to Atlanta, and then all the way, well, Dee drove all the way back by herself. And along that route, like, our goal was to stop and meet and speak with anybody and everybody that would talk to us. But we have the more desire to speak with women of color and trans women women of trans experience of color as well, and let everyone know, like, we are not walking death traps. Like, that's not us. We are beautiful. We deserve to have love and respect. And let's talk about you equals you. And we had this huge banner across the back as we're driving down the street, and people asking us, what are we doing, and stopping. And it was just an amazing, amazing, amazing experience to actually speak to different people about you equals you. And I think out of that, I think we reached, we did testing as well. We offered testing while we were out. We had a roundtable with Mama Joyce Turner, and we spoke with all of the individuals that were there were primarily HIV negative. And we ate dinner. It was amazing. If you haven't ate at Mama Turner's house, oh my Lord Jesus. I'm still having some Mama Joyce. That I'm still thinking about that Kool-Aid, y'all. That Kool-Aid was something serious. But I digress. All of that to literally say, like, we talk openly and frankly about sex, about relationships, about stigma. Like, you know, what is it like to have a family member that's living with HIV? Or what is it like to know someone that's living with HIV? And how can you support us, and how can we support you in your education? Because one of the things we did do was talk about stigmatic language. My favorite stop on the tour was actually at Morehouse College in Atlanta, and we had the opportunity to speak to 21 young men about what we're doing in stigmatic language. And that was the most fulfilling experience of our entire lives. So look out. I'm praying we're going for round number 2 when everything gets back in, but we could start in our states. But she decided to take it bigger. And I just happened to be the fly on the wall that happened to go along with her to experience it with her. And it was amazing.
Don't sell yourself short. You were an integral part of that road trip. May have been her idea, but you were a big part. Super, super exciting. I was following you all on social media. That was really exciting. And Masonia, you also have, I've actually been to a workshop that you presented about you equals you. I know that you do them for the Well Project. Why is it important for you to get the word out? And maybe you can tell us a little bit about the Well Project.
Well, because yes, I am a CAB member of the Well Project. Let me start there, and a loyal member of, sorry about that. I am a CAB member of the Well Project, a blogger, and a loyal member to PWN as well. And for me, with You Equals You, what's so important to me about it is how much power and autonomy it gives you around controlling something that it makes you feel that's uncontrollable. You know, I think that part right there, having the ability to teach my children is so beautiful. I have a 16-year-old son and a now 9-year-old daughter that can speak to You Equals You. And because of You Equals You and the understanding of that, my son can confidently say, why wouldn't I date someone with AIDS? And it's a no-brainer, and it's so fluid for him to be able to do that. And for other people, it would be like, oh, he used the word AIDS. And then my daughter saying, my mommy has HIV, unknowingly knowing that, you know, she doesn't know that people can be really mean about HIV and the word, like, it's just so normal for them. And to normalize the language has been really big for me. So You Equals You allows me to normalize the language. HIV and AIDS seems to be something that's just so taboo still to this day to talk about and discuss, that people are, you know, they say, oh, why, you know, and I do think we're all being brave, but to hear it repetitively, it's like, oh, you guys really don't talk about it that much like we do with diabetes. Nobody gasps when you say, I have high blood pressure. Can y'all imagine that? If somebody gasps when they say they have high blood pressure, or gas because, you know, they have diabetes or any other chronic illness now. So shifting that. So U equals U for me is just seeing how much accountability can be placed on community on both sides of the spectrum, not just people living with HIV, but also people supporting us or the lack thereof. Them understanding U equals U says, you know what, I need to do a better job of supporting them, for those who know their status and those who don't, so that when you shift that language, you can draw in that compassion, you can draw in that understanding, you can draw in that empathy, you can draw in that the destruction of fear behind an HIV diagnosis, so that we can get closer and closer and closer to that last person having an HIV or AIDS diagnosis. So for me, just starting with my family, I've seen, I know, excuse me, I don't want to say I've seen, I know stories where you have 3 generations of individuals living with HIV. So we're talking about the grandmother, the mother, and the grandchild. That means nobody had a discussion between each other. It was too late. It's just an assumption that, oh, you'll learn it in school. No big deal. You'll learn it out there in the real world. So U equals U empowers us to have that tough but much needed conversation around addressing how we love with HIV, not just how we're living with it, but how we love with HIV as well. And not just HIV, those with AIDS. Because I know there are oftentimes some people say, we've got to eradicate AIDS. And it's like, well, there are people still there with it. And they're oftentimes, doing better and thriving better than myself with HIV. I'm down to the medications that they take, or how much medication they may take, or how they're just living their lives so boldly. So I just, I love the U equals U messaging. I appreciate it. I respect it. I look forward to the many times that I get to utilize it for women who are pregnant and they're afraid, they're so terrified, and I get to give them, I get to use it as a tool for them. I'll give you a real quick story. There's a young lady that I've known about 8 years. So about a year after my diagnosis, I met her. She was born positive, and she was pregnant about 3 years ago. And she was terrified because she had never achieved an undetectable viral load, ever. And I told her, she said, well, what if my daughter is born with an HIV diagnosis? She says, what if my daughter was born with an HIV diagnosis? And I said, you would give her the same encouragement that you give to yourself, that you give to me, and that you've given to so many others, that she's going to be okay. Aren't you in a healthy relationship? She says, yes. But during her pregnancy, by the time she was 6 months pregnant, she achieved an undetectable viral load. For the first time in her life. She was over 30 years of age, and that was her first time achieving an undetectable viral load. Can you imagine? You've been on medications your entire life since you were born, and this is your first time, and you birthed an HIV negative baby. That gave her even more language to say, me equals me, which means you equals you. I did everything I need to do for me, and now I get to love on this child in a way that now I just have to teach her about you equals you, so that she does not get an HIV diagnosis when she gets older. She will be accountable for it. She can understand it. And, if she does end up, God forbid, but if she ends up in a position where she does contract HIV, she knows what to do. She knows how far she can go with it instead of just giving up, because she'll understand you equals you. So that's why it's so important to me, and especially for women, gatekeepers of education, knowledge, talking. We're the talkers. I think that it is so important for us to not only have this information, but to continue to educate and talk about it as much as possible without stopping, not thinking that, you said it once to somebody, say it 5 more times to that person. You done told me already, good. Let me tell you again. And it brings me a lot of joy, though, to know that undetectable means untransmittable and it makes me not fear myself as much. And those around me won't have to fear as much either. So.
Awesome, thank you so much. And I love that you were talking about having kids. One of our panelists is actually recently, she has a young child at home and is about to have another one in October. Heather, you want to share a little bit about your experience? And I believe do you breastfeed? All right, or?
Yes. Yeah. So I have a 19-month-old daughter, Aurora, and so I had talked about my diagnosis, and I had said, my initial question was, am I going to die? My second question was, can I be a mother? It's something I've always wanted children. I've always wanted to become a mother. And so, after finding out that I was pregnant, navigating how to receive healthcare, I had also just moved. So I had a new infectious disease doctor that I was seeing. And I also had to find an OBGYN. And so I ended up initially making an appointment, to confirm the pregnancy and everything. And they, were very positive with me, excited for me. They knew about U equals U. And I had let them know, since I had been on medication, in 2016, I had been undetectable. And so they were excited for me, but they were unable to care for me. So they said, we don't feel comfortable, seeing you throughout this pregnancy. We'd rather you go to a bigger clinic in Roanoke and receive some care there. So basically with my pregnancy, when you are living with HIV as, a pregnant woman, at least in Virginia, where, I've received my care, you are also considered a high risk pregnancy. So the biggest, the most important thing, of course, is making sure that you're adhering to your medication throughout your pregnancy to keep your viral load undetectable. And so I would attend prenatal appointments as anyone else would, but I also received growth ultrasounds. I had begun taking Biktarvy, which was a new medication at the time. And I had been taking that for a few months, which meant that there was not any research on pregnancy and Biktarvy. So all of my care providers were saying, we just need to monitor. We think everything is going to be okay. We need to make sure you stay undetectable, and we'll see what happens. Was really what we were met with. My daughter, throughout the pregnancy, she measured smaller, but she's a little bean and she's healthy and everything. They thought it might be intrauterine growth restriction, but it was not. So we had a great pregnancy with my daughter. Something else that came up for me living with HIV and being pregnant is that because I'm put in the category of a high-risk pregnancy, it's also standard to induce the mother at 39 weeks. So that was what happened for me, because the reasoning was from my care providers is that from week 39 to 40, they wanted to make sure that there was not a peak in my viral load that would prevent me from being able to deliver vaginally. Because if you are undetectable at the time of delivery, you can have a vaginal delivery and you do not need to receive antiretroviral therapy during the birth. You are already undetectable. So they wanted to make sure, even though I had been undetectable, I am adherent to my medication. They tested me regularly throughout the pregnancy. They still wanted to go with the induction at 39 weeks. So being new to pregnancy, I'm like, okay, all right, let's do it. I was in labor for over 30 hours. My daughter was not ready to come out. And then when it came time to, finally, when I was in active labor, after I had done, I had Cervidil to help me dilate. I was not dilated. I had Pitocin. I had the Foley bulb. I mean, it was a very strenuous process. I pushed for 3 hours and my daughter did not want to come out. And so they said, I think you're going to have a C-section. We want to keep the risk of transmission as low as possible. But my daughter was so low in the birth canal that they said, if we do proceed with a C-section, we risk cutting your bladder, which could expose your daughter to the virus. So we either go with an assisted delivery or we can do the C-section. And I said, I'm having a contraction. I'm going to push. My daughter's coming. So we went forward. My daughter was born. It was rough. I mean, she had jaundice. She was very bruised. It was traumatic to say the least, but we're both okay. And so I had always wanted to breastfeed. It was something that I saw, just going with my journey as a mother. It's something I always wanted to do. I'm a firm believer that any way that you feed and nourish your child that is best for you is best for your child. And for me, that was breastfeeding. I wanted to be able to do that. And I had always heard, if you have HIV, you can transmit the virus to your child through breast milk. It's on the medication bottles. It says if you're a woman living with HIV, do not breastfeed as the virus can be passed to your child. So I just sort of took a back seat to during all my appointments and said, when it came to how are you going to feed your child, I sort of said, well, I understand I need to use formula. And that was the conversation. Okay, good. I'm glad you know that. Well, I got a new infectious disease doctor. And when I saw him for the first time, I was pregnant and he brought up feeding my child. And I told him, I know I need to use formula. And he said, well, no, I mean, have you thought about breastfeeding? Would you want to breastfeed? And I said, absolutely, but I know that that's not possible. And so then he actually educated me about the PROMISE studies that were done in Africa with women who are living with HIV, undetectable viral loads on their medication, breastfeeding their children. And the children also took AZT as a preventative after birth. And I learned that the percentage chance of transmission was very, very low. So it sort of put that in my mind. But when my daughter, was born, I was met with anxiety, fear about bringing up breastfeeding at all. Just the thought, what if, because although U equals U means that there's no risk of transmission to your sexual partner, there are studies done on breast milk, but breast milk seems to work a little differently. So there's not a lot of information, and in the US at all, there's not. The CDC recommends that you do not breastfeed your child, that you use formula if you're living with HIV. But in the hospital, I ended up having a conversation with the nurse. I started giving my daughter formula, and I felt in my heart that that's not what was supposed to happen. Maybe it's maternal instinct. I just knew that wasn't what I wanted. And so I requested from the nurse that I speak to a lactation consultant and that she coordinate with my infectious disease doctor to talk about the possibility of breastfeeding. Long story short, after talking to my infectious disease doctor, the lactation consultant came back and she spoke to the head nurse, and they were on board, which is not the experience for most women living with HIV, and probably not the experience for people, for, you know, Black women or people of, you know, of other colors, you know, people of color. But as a white woman, I was accepted in that way. And I understand that that is part of my privilege as well. Would it be different? I don't know, but it's something to consider for sure. And so I decided to breastfeed. Throughout the breastfeeding process, I decided to pump and flash heat the breast milk in the beginning. That's something that is regularly done in Africa to kill the virus in the milk. But after a while, I just couldn't keep up with it. So my doctor had a conversation with me and said, he actually explained that the flash heating kills a lot of the nutrients in the breast milk. And he told me, you don't have to do this. You know, you can breastfeed your child. And so I ended up making that transition. My daughter and I made that transition. We were able to breastfeed for 14 months. She was on AZT during the time. She was tested throughout. We were both followed, and she did not contract the virus. So she's happy and healthy, and we were able to have that like wonderful relationship, which meant so much to me. And it felt right in my heart. And I felt like that was what was right for us. And so that being said, I'm now 31 weeks pregnant with a little boy, and I am planning on breastfeeding him as well and also I'm advocating to have a natural birth, to go into labor naturally and not be induced. So I'm bringing that conversation up with my care providers as well. Because if I'm undetectable, if I'm adherent, if we're testing my levels, if we know this, then can my body make the decision? And it's been going well, and I've been receiving a lot of support. But something that I've learned through sharing my story with breastfeeding is that a lot of women living with HIV do not even know that they can have children at all. I mean, there are women that respond to my story and say, I wasn't even aware that I could have a child. And that's something that needs to be addressed, because I mean, if it's part of your journey, if that's part of, you know, you, and then you should be able to explore that, and you should be able to do that in a way that you feel confident and supported, and, you know, able to have those conversations with your medical care provider, because pregnancy is hard, and breastfeeding is hard, and being a mom is hard, and living with HIV is hard. Being a human being is hard, you know? And so support and conversation, and it's so, so important. But I'm very, very happy to say that my daughter is healthy, and that I'm very excited to, if nature allows, have, you know, the relationship of breastfeeding my son. So
that's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. Really appreciate it. You know, and it's not settled, like you mentioned. I know in Africa, in a lot of cases, they do advise breastfeeding because it's actually safer than, you know, formula with the water, etc. You know, here that's not happening yet, but it is really good to hear that at least, you know, there are some providers who are being supportive with that. You know, I think when we had this conversation a couple of years ago, and we had Shannon Weber on here, some folks may know her from Hive in San Francisco, and, you know, she was talking about the importance of providers having, you know, nuanced conversations about the possible risk and the benefits, and, you know, allowing women to make their own decisions about that, and to be supportive of the decisions that they make. So it's really good to hear that at least some people are, you know, some providers are doing that. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. We're getting a little close on time, but I'm gonna have two questions. So first I wanted to ask Sherryl. I know, Sherryl, you touched on this briefly earlier, but so Sherryl was one of our PWN policy fellows. Is she still here? Did she fall off? Oh no, Sherryl fell off. All right, well, so never mind. she must have lost her connection. Then I'm gonna go to the other question I was gonna ask, and this is for anyone who wants to answer. Let's keep it brief, but I would love to hear from anyone who's interested in answering. There have been at least 2 or 3 questions in the Q&A box around disclosure. And the gist of all the questions sort of being, if you know you're undetectable, you know, do you feel an obligation to disclose, or is there a consensus around whether you should or shouldn't disclose? It's a very personal question. So folks may have different answers, and your answer for yourself may be different from, you know, your answer is like a general rule, but would love to hear what you all have to say about that.
I'll go first, and then I'm done. So in Arkansas, there is an HIV criminalization statute on the books, right? Specifically for non-disclosure. It doesn't matter if there was no HIV transmitted, but if I have a sexual partner and I don't tell my partner in Arkansas that I'm HIV positive, right? And we do everything that we have to do to protect ourselves, the fact that I didn't disclose can be taken to court, and I can be imprisoned for that. So, because I love my freedom, and like I said earlier, I never want to take the choice away from anybody else. I'm for disclosure, but it is a very personal choice, and you have to take into consideration like whether you're going to be safe in disclosing and stuff like that. But yeah, that should be like a minute.
Thank you.
So for me, Masonia Traylor here. I first want to say thank you to Heather. Your story brought me to tears. I just wanted to let you know your story is so much of a success story, and I celebrate you. I thank you. Disclosure for me, I do feel there's an obligation for me to do it, but in the way that I choose to. So if you don't boldly ask, I do not say it unless I am going to be engaging in a risk behavior that could potentially put you at risk. But outside of that, I don't disclose unless you ask me, do I have HIV?
In Virginia, we have a similar law to what Tiommi spoke about in Arkansas, and we're working really hard from the Coalition ECHO Virginia. We're trying to work on some of those changes. I personally do disclose as well, just similar to what Tiommi said, but I do respect that there are other people that don't feel the, you know, that feel in their personal that they don't have to disclose or don't want to. I support that fully and wholeheartedly. But in Virginia, we do have the same disclosure law. But I disclose, doesn't mean I have sex yet, but I still disclose.
I forgot to mention in Georgia, we also have the same laws, and we're working really hard to decriminalize HIV. So with that being said, you know, I do encourage people to disclose, but I still ask, like, what is your purpose behind disclosure before you do that? So even if it is for physical intimacy, I still say, you know, if you decide to disclose to that person, one needs to be responsible enough to ask and not put all the pressure only on you and your obligation to do so, because this is a community action to take responsibility in that. But also, if you do have HIV and you're just wanting to make sure that you are protecting someone else, you know, we do encourage that you do disclose, just to give someone an opportunity that you may not have been given in your HIV diagnosis. But in Georgia, we do have a disclosure law where you do need to disclose, or you could potentially be charged as a criminal for not doing so.
Thank you. And real quick, I just actually wanted, Wahida is here with us, and I'm remembering something she said, and I wanted to reframe it real quick, that maybe we should stop talking about disclosure and just talk about sharing your status, because disclosure implies that it's like a secret. And maybe it is for, you know, for a lot of people it is a secret, but, you know, it doesn't need to be something that people feel ashamed of. So maybe let's talk about, yeah, sharing our status rather than disclosing. So just a quick reframe, and yeah, would love to hear from other panelists your thoughts on it.
If we reframe it that way, that's an even more reason why I disclose, or even more so share my status. just in a tool to just help people in their daily living, like from people saying, well, HIV is not going to happen to me. And then when you open up, you know, some of the possible risk or things or behaviors that you may be participating in, then it's like, oh, well, I never thought about that. And not necessarily always thinking towards the negative activities, you know, just if you're doing certain things. But I share everywhere and anywhere that would be a help for other people living with or living without HIV.
Well, and I think that sharing your status also helps to normalize it, because it can happen to you. It can happen to anybody. So I think it helps. I think it's a good thing to do because it helps other people realize that, oh, you have it? Well, yeah, I guess it could happen to me too. I just think it feels more of a normal conversation, and you're sharing yourself and you're being honest.
So for me, I have been a teacher, a dance teacher, a lot of my life. You know, after graduating college, my degree is in dance. And so that being said, I taught dance to, you know, children of a very young age, all the way to, you know, 18 or older. And they come across on my social media. And so of course you're presented with that. Do I add them? Do I become friends with them? But when I decided to be open with my status, I was sort of presented with these conflicts. Do I share, am I open on Facebook to where my students can see it? And I made the decision to do so, to talk about it and to be open about my HIV, about the struggles, about talking about U equals U, talking about pregnancy, breastfeeding, because I feel as though that age as a teenager is it's so important. You know, we need to be talking about sex. It doesn't need to be stigmatized. Even, you know, being in a sexual situation with someone, there's sort of there's stigma and there's fear around, you know, even asking about protection at times. I feel in my own personal experience and in experiences that I've, you know, shared with other women, but it needs to be normalized. You know, we need to talk about it. And I feel the more we talk about it, it just brings it to the forefront. And I think that's what I missed out on when I was growing up. I wasn't talked to about sex. You know, we didn't have those conversations at my school or, you know, with my friends or anything. It was just sort of like a taboo thing. So I myself have decided that I want to continue to share my status and want to continue to educate and to normalize so that other people feel comfortable doing the same. So that's just my own personal experience with it.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. And I really want to uplift that and appreciate it. Also, you know, with the caveat that for some people it's not safe to share their status, and, you know, always want to be very respectful. You know, women living with HIV in particular, cis and trans women living with HIV are at high risk of intimate partner violence. And so, you know, it's not safe for everyone to share their status, but for folks that do feel safe doing so, you're really, you know, it's a wonderful gift to everyone else, because that's how, you know, I always think of it a little bit in my mind as when we think about, for example, marriage equality and LGBTQ rights. You know, there have always been LGBTQ people, but folks were living in the shadows, and the more people started to come out and talk about, you know, being who they were and being true to themselves, the more it's become accepted. Because when you know somebody and it's somebody you love, then all of a sudden, you know, it's harder to have those same stereotypes and misconceptions, because, you know, now it's your brother, your cousin, your coworker, your best friend. So I feel like, you know, for folks who can be open about it and who feel safe doing so, it's really a wonderful gift to everyone else. And I've definitely, in my work at Positive Women's Network, I've seen, you know, women come in who were not public with their status, where only, you know, a few people knew, and I've seen them go public and really blossom and feel a lot better about themselves and more confident once they've done so, because they feel like they're not carrying the weight of this sort of secret or this shame anymore, and they're just proud of who they are. And HIV is just one small part of who they are, but when that's something you don't have to hide anymore, it's a, you know, it's a great feeling. So I really want to uplift that and appreciate all of you so much for, you know, being willing to be vulnerable and to be brave and to share so much of yourselves, because it really is so beneficial for other folks. And I'm sure that a lot of the folks who were here with us today would agree with that. And so, yeah, just really want to thank all of you so much. And I see Alicia in the chat, sharing your status is definitely a choice and you should never feel pressured. Absolutely. It should be something that you do because you're ready and it's the right thing for you to do. And so, yeah, don't feel pressured. So yeah, I think we're at time, a little past time, but just want to really thank everyone so much for being here with us. For folks who for our participants today, we will be sending out an email with the link to the recording, as well as a few other resources around U equals U, including a fact sheet around breastfeeding and U equals U from the Well Project. Because I know that a lot of folks are interested in that, and it's a really great question, and I'm really glad that we got a chance to discuss that briefly today. So big appreciation to our panelists, yay, big thanks to everybody who was here with us, and I hope everyone has a great rest of your day. Bye. Oh, and I see about stigmatizing language, and yes, I can add that to the resources we send out. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you. Love you all.
Love you.